Hello, good evening, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you to the College of Fellows for inviting me here this evening. It's a real honor, and I'm really humbled when I look at the list of previous speakers in this slot. But I'm also exhilarated to be able to talk about something that's near and dear to me, which is our water future, and the role that heritage should and must play in it. Well, we can start there. Yeah, so just, I wanted to say a few words that are not going to surprise you about the role of water in the human story. It's essential. We all know that. But I think what's fascinating is that that relationship changes when civilizations are established and grow. It moves from settling near accessible water to actually taking control of water, trying to manage it, trying to build infrastructure that conveys, stores, captures, and sometimes fends it off. And ultimately, that relationship is also essential. Civilizations survive and thrive because of their ability to manage water. And even though I'm talking about where we are today and some of our water future, we're all preservationists, so we need to look back. And I thought we needed to start with some key examples. I always start with this image because I think it really explains this relationship of civilization and water. This is Huanghe, the Yellow River in China, the second longest river in China at 5,400 kilometers in length. And it's also the seat along its banks of one of the earliest civilizations in China. And in fact, somewhere between history and myth is this story that the founding of the first dynasty of China, the Xia dynasty, it took place because the great Emperor Yu figured out how to control floods of this very river. And so that story that all Chinese learn underscores the importance of this relationship. Now, let's look at some infrastructure. This is a dam, 2,800 years old, the Great Dam of Ma'arib in modern Yemen. And this is actually part of the great kingdom of Saba, which is often referred to in the Bible as Sheba. You think of the Queen of Sheba. And this empire, kingdom, was indeed powerful because of its ability to manage water. It created this massive dam over 500 meters in length, so what is that, 1,600 feet or so, that captured the monsoon rains, held them, and then they had a series of irrigation systems to feed their crops and their people. This dam, with, of course, alteration, maintenance, upkeep, some extension and growth, lasted for 1,200 years. And indeed, its final breach and failure is tied to the migration of 50,000 Yemenis to other parts of the Saudi Peninsula, or the Arabian Peninsula. Another example that I love, and I hope you will all take some joy in this digital reconstruction, not mine, but that I borrowed up above. But this is the great port of ancient Rome. And though it was a port that had been used at least for 1,000 years before this iteration, this version of it, in the 2nd century, the Emperor Trajan said, we need a much more monumental port that protects the ships from the ravages of the sea, but also continues to allow a large amount of shipment movement in a massive way. So this hexagon that you see that is the port, each side of the hexagon is 1,000 feet in length. And I use this example because down below, if you look at a Google Earth image from today, any of you who have flown into Rome's Fiumicino Airport have gone right over this. The airport is just to the left. And this landscape, this massive engineering feat, still marks the landscape 2,000 years later, though, of course, they've reclaimed some land and the sea is further away. But this hexagon of a lake still remains. And the last example from our trot around the world is the Cantayoc aqueducts in Peru, related to the Nazca Empire or kingdom. And this is very similar in structure. It's basically an underground water channel, similar to the qanats of the Middle East or North Africa, but with these wonderful, ingenious spiral access holes or points, right, that not only allow access for maintenance and access to the water itself, but also prevent evaporation in a very arid climate. And you may notice that this water is still flowing and in use today, as you can tell by the agricultural lands that run alongside. So I take you on this little tour to highlight in particular something that I don't think we often think about enough, which is the fact that our global cultural landscape is replete with amazing feats of engineering related to water, incredible water heritage that we can learn from, and that in many cases we can actually rehabilitate and use in a dire time. And before I give examples of how we might do that, I thought a lecture on water has to talk about both extremes, too much and not enough. So we'll start with the too much. And with the too much, we're really talking about cataclysmic flood. And the image you see here is the Great Flood of Venice in 1966, the greatest flood ever on record to occur there. Water rose 6.5 feet above ground level. And you can see right in front of St. Mark's Basilica, people in their boats right on the piazza that I'm sure many of you have visited. This was, and I'm sorry, pun intended, a watershed moment in many ways, because this was a moment when people realized, wow, Venice, the center of culture, of refined art, and of course incredible heritage buildings, is something that is threatened, like so many other places. It also ties into the history of the World Monuments Fund, because though we had been established the year prior, it's our 60th anniversary, we began a long commitment of projects in Venice, though not related to the water piece, I have to say. So now let's jump to the present in Venice. I'm sure you were all familiar with the MOSE system, Modulo Sperimentale Elettromeccanico, the experimental electromechanic module. And this was first tested fully in 2020 after about $8 billion of expenditure as a way to keep out the seasonal high tides. And note that I say that, keep that in mind. This is about seasonal high tides, something that have plagued Venice for centuries, the acqua alta, as the Venetians call it. For those of you who may not know how this works, it's almost like a large pontoon. It lays flat in the bed of the lagoon when not needed, and then when there are predictions of these tides coming in, it's filled with air and it floats to the top and gives almost 3 meters of additional protection. Now, the challenge of this, first of all, this is an incredibly successful engineering feat, a very expensive one, but successful. Since 2020, they've been able to fend off the acqua alta from lapping at the feet of the heritage buildings in Venice. The challenge is in its success. Venetians think that they are safe from sea level rise. Well, we have MOSE. You send the air in, it shoots up, and it's going to keep that seawater out. It's not designed for that. It was never designed for that. And the fact is that just with 50 centimeters of sea level rise, which is well in the predictions for sure of 100 years, but even within 50 years, the MOSE system would have to be constantly deployed. That poses 2 problems. One, the Venetian lagoon, which is the largest wetland in the Mediterranean basin, would become a stinking, ranking cesspit. Because that ecosystem relies on the continual movement and refreshing of seawater. And so the ecosystem would die, and of course all the human activity would cause pollution that would sit there. And that would be a big challenge. The second challenge is that the MOSE system would no longer work against these seasonal tides or storm surge or anything like that. It would quickly be overtopped. So again, this is a purpose-built solution that highlights our ability to develop solutions, but sometimes our short-sightedness in just handling the challenge that we see in front of us, as opposed to thinking a bit further into the future. And more with climate change, we see these challenges. The 100-year flood becomes the 50-year flood. All of these things are on shorter terms, and we're seeing things last longer, or less time. I'll give you an example. This is actually a World Monuments Fund project, successful but short-sighted. Here we are in Thailand. This is Wat Chai Watanaram, or Wat Chai in Ayutthaya, the World Heritage Site of Ayutthaya, about, 40 miles north of Bangkok, along the Chao Phraya River that you see in the distance. 400-year-old Buddhist temple in the Khmer style. Incredible place, but we're not here to talk about the site and the history. We're here to talk about water. In 2011, Thailand was subject to the worst flood of its history, at least recorded history. Most of the country was declared a disaster zone. And in fact, at the time, it was rated as the world's costliest natural disaster. We were brought in, actually, because of the United States State Department. And the Secretary of State at that time, Hillary Clinton, happened to be in a helicopter surveying the disaster area and saw these temples and said, this heritage has to be protected. So the State Department reached out to us and said, can you work with the Thai authorities and come up with something? Again, this was a watershed moment where the Thai authorities realized we have to be thinking about this. We have to be thinking about climate change and ways to save our very important heritage. And as you can see in the image, the temple was sitting in about 2 meters of water. This was a major, major flood. So what did we do? Well, quite honestly, a simple solution. Just an image of the before and after. Do I have a pointer here? Just to give you a sense, on the left screen over here, Wat Chai Temple is just about here at this third big cloud. And you can see, obviously, the before and the after being basically an entire wetland, all of this landscape underwater. But our solution was relatively simple, not too far from the mosaic concept. A swing floodgate made of steel that could be deployed when, and this is very important, when there was coordination and warning from the water authorities, right? And particularly those who controlled the dam upstream. So the idea is that they call to the site and say, we're going to have to release quite a bit of water, and you need to be ready and be prepared. So this swing gate can be deployed. Here it is in full deployment. It provides an additional 2.7 meters of protection from the river water or any flood waters. And you can see it here along the eastern perimeter of the site, right next to the river. We also had to really rebuild a failing flood wall on the south perimeter of the site. This is a permanent flood wall that also provides this 2.7 meters of protection. And great, another example of success. Sadly, very soon after completion, we were able to test this. In 2022, another major flood, not at the level of the 2011 flood, but still quite severe, occurred. And you can see to the south, the lower part, lower left-hand side, all the buildings sitting in water, this whole flooded landscape, but the site remains dry. However, and this is an image from the Bangkok Post saying, Wat Chai has been saved from the floods. You notice that the water is higher than the site, and at its height, the floodwaters were only 10 centimeters from the top of that wall. Again, we designed for what we thought was coming, and climate change has provided new challenges. We need to be adaptable in our thinking and in our engineering solutions. This is just from a few weeks ago, downstream in the middle of Bangkok. Those of you who've been may know Wat Po. This is like the Vatican of Thai Buddhism, the most sacred and important temple in Thailand. And here, at least a foot of water from the Chao Phraya River. This is an ongoing challenge that all of us around the world have to learn to adapt to. Before I leave floods, I thought I'd bring it a little bit closer to home, and LA, and again, an engineering solution and strategy. The LA River, I think you can all picture it, largely a cemented channel, 51 miles in length. We'll come back to that. How did we get there? Well, it was a natural river, a river that meandered and changed path quite a bit. But at the turn of the 20th century, there were 3 major floods within 25 years. The images you see here are from the last of those in 1938. Over 5 days, The San Gabriel Mountains that sit to the north, just behind the largely populated area of LA, received 35 inches of rain, 5 days. The populated area received an additional 10 inches. The waterways couldn't handle this. The ground couldn't handle this. And so you can see the damage to infrastructure, the damage to property, and you can imagine the torrents of water as well as this watery landscape that suddenly was this metropolitan area of LA. 115 people died, 6,000 homes destroyed, over a third of greater LA underwater. So, what happened? Well, after that third flood, the people of LA were fed up. And they already had plans in place. And literally, once the water receded in 1938, they began the work. And I thought to a room full of engineers and architects, these numbers are important and impressive. In 20 years, 20 million cubic yards of earth had been moved, 3.5 million barrels of cement poured, 147 million pounds of reinforced steel used, and 460,000 tons of stone to create the LA River as we know it today. Now remember, the focus there was we have too much water. If we want to survive, if we want to thrive as a metropolitan area, we need to get that water out of here. And what many, even Angelenos, don't know is that still today, many of the roads and streets, that system is considered part of the flood control system. They are meant to convey water. And so I have been in many meetings with engineers in LA saying they have to stop worrying about their cars. Too bad. It's part of the flood control system. And all of that water is diverted into the LA River. So, 51 miles of concrete, and the only purpose to get the water out as fast as possible. At times, it flows as fast as 45 miles an hour, from the mountains all the way down to Long Beach, where it enters the Pacific Ocean. And of course, many of you know that as we turn the page and think about the other extreme of not enough water, LA is a place that very much suffers from that. And so now, the efforts are to re-green, tear up the concrete, create new opportunities, one, to slow the water, create habitat, enjoy the benefits of urban cooling from more green space, biodiversity, but also stop the water and try to capture some of it and replenish parched aquifers. And there's now a plan in place as of 2022 to do this. This has been done in little patches as money was made available and jurisdictions agreed and all of that. But now there's a plan to do this for the whole 51-mile corridor. $24 billion. We'll see if it happens. And so we turn to the too much or too little and never enough water chapter, right? And I think it's good to stay in LA for a moment with this. I love this map done by Stephanie Pinsettle at UCLA, who has studied the management of water throughout LA County for a number of years. And this shows the percentage of water in these various jurisdictions that is imported. And you can see that the western half of LA County, large amounts, at least 80% of the water is imported, often from as far away as 300 miles. Think about the conveyance infrastructure that's in place, the energy to do that. This is not gravity-fed water. Sometimes this has to go up over mountains and come back down. Huge amount of cost and effort to bring water because there's not enough. And yet you've got this 51-mile channel that's capturing all the storm water and throwing it out to sea. So what do you do in a case like this? Well, you have to rethink your infrastructure. You have to think, how can we be more sustainable? And you also need to understand the very harsh complexity of the LA landscape. 5,000 square miles is LA County in area, over 10 million residents, 88 incorporated cities, and huge unincorporated areas. And then when you add the water landscape to that, you have over 200 public and private entities that manage water, bring water, sell water, store water, capture it, manage groundwater basins. They all have different agendas. Any of you who've seen Chinatown, that classic movie, you have a sense of the Wild West that was water in LA and that unfortunately still is. And so you have to bring everyone together. And LA County created a county water plan a number of years ago. I had the honor and privilege of helping to pull that together at its beginning and hold a number of stakeholder meetings to bring people together, all these water entities, to try to plan together, as well as the various jurisdictions. And now they have a shared vision and a lot of targets, but a lot of work to do. And by the way, on average, 60% of the water used in LA is imported. So, as you adapt and reuse infrastructure, one of the things to do is rethink the infrastructure you have. So, dams that were used just as reservoirs that would then be piped directly to homes can now be part of the flood control district, yes, and hold that water back so there's not damaging flows below. But then also think about, how do we use this water in a smart way? How do we recycle and how do we recharge groundwater aquifers? And so you see here, I think you all know the science, the concept behind this, but basically putting into these large areas retention basins that hold the water and let the water percolate down into the aquifers. And then eventually that water is pumped out. And you can see on the map here some of the 30-plus spreading grounds, these huge areas that hold water and allow for groundwater recharge across the county. Just some images of infrastructure. This is Morris Dam, historic infrastructure itself. It was built in the 1930s by the city of Pasadena as an impoundment dam just to hold water for drinking for their city residents. It is now owned and operated by the Los Angeles County Flood Control District and is part of this flood control infrastructure, but it also controls that flow. And by the way, I should say this is a beautiful Art Deco structure. I had the pleasure of spending quite a bit of time at this dam, and it's a really incredible structure. But it controls the water flow and sends it down to spreading grounds like these, the Rio Hondo spreading grounds, some of the largest in LA County. Over the course of a year, these spreading grounds can recharge enough water for 160,000 households. And so that supplies a large part of that groundwater that is used throughout the county. I thought in talking about water infrastructure, I couldn't leave out water treatment and wastewater treatment. This is the Hyperion wastewater treatment plant. Many of you who have flown in and out of LAX will have flown right over this and perhaps have seen it. It's 144 acres in size. It's self-historic, and it was built to manage to handle 500 million gallons of water per day. It does not handle that much. It handles less than half. And of that, only 27% is recycled. Now, they have a mandate in 10 years, by 2035, to move that to 100%. We'll see if they make it. But again, all these coordinated efforts to be more sustainable in the water management and to adapt and reuse the infrastructure that is in place accordingly. So let's go to the global stage. And I put these numbers up because I think these are numbers that we should all have in our heads. I was speaking earlier to someone and was saying, sorry, I'm going to paint a little bit of a dismal picture of where we're headed in terms of our water future. But the reality is that as many as 3 billion people today experience water shortages for at least a month a year. That means for the period of a month, it could be multiple days over the course of the year that add up to a month. But for that period, they do not have the water they typically rely on, and they have to come up with other solutions or immediately change their behavior. By 2050, 25 years from now, the projections are that urban water demand will increase by 80%. Think about what that means. We just talked about the city of LA importing 60% of its water. Even with all these beautiful plans and wonderful investment, whatever progress they're able to make, they're going to be chasing these new numbers as demand grows. And many cities around the world do not have enough water, and that demand continues to grow. Within a few decades, as many as 2.5 billion people in cities could face water scarcity. That means regularly not having enough water. And this is where I say heritage has a role to play, and particularly in this case, water heritage. Remember that I took you on that very short tour, but there is tons of historic, and sometimes not very ancient, but sometimes quite ancient, water infrastructure scattered around the world that sometimes is just sitting there, waiting for a little TLC to start up again. And so I want to talk to you about two projects that we've been doing at World Monuments Fund to rehabilitate existing, in some cases, very ancient water infrastructure and bring water back to communities. So we go to Nepal and the Kathmandu Valley. So again, looking to the left, Kathmandu is this area right here. You see that big dot, and so the valley of Kathmandu, for decades now, has had a much higher water demand than supply. 3 times the demand of the supply they have. A lot of challenges. They're over-pumping groundwater, they're bringing water in from other places, and now they have a huge project to build a dam 20 miles away, hold water, and bring that water in to try to feed the need. Only 70% of people have piped water in their homes. And even they, a few days every month, see their tap run dry. So they've got to figure out strategies, ways to backfill, to provide for that water that's not there, that they can normally rely on. Now you have the rest of the people who don't have water in their homes. What do? Well, this is where heritage is quite amazing. There's a very ancient network of systems known as Hitis or Hitimanga throughout the Kathmandu Valley associated with the Newars. And we don't really know how many there were at its height. We know there were at least 1,000. And they date back to, the earliest records of them go back to the 6th century. So we're talking 1,400 years of infrastructure that has provided water, and for many centuries was the sole source of water for many members of local communities. But in recent years is that extra, that how you fill that gap when the water you normally rely on is not there. And the challenge is, as is often the case with infrastructure and heritage that's taken for granted, these things are disappearing. Of the 500 extant Hiti systems, only about half of them actually still provide water. And this is a very common scene throughout the Kathmandu Valley. If you walk around, you will eventually end up at one of these Hiti complexes with people collecting their daily water. A lot of people use it for drinking, but it's mostly used as gray water, right? So for laundry and cleaning and bathing and all that other stuff. So how does this system work? It's pretty simple. It's gravity fed. It's an underground channel, usually constructed of brick with terracotta elements, that taps into an aquifer, and then, because you're in a valley, can tap into an aquifer uphill and have a nice grade going down, and that water rolls down and comes out to that distribution point. So pretty simple, and many of them have worked for centuries, even at least a millennium. So what's the challenge? Well, the challenge is, those of you who may have known Kathmandu in the 70s or even 80s may know a city that was covered with small little ponds, water bodies all around. These were basically retention basins, areas capturing stormwater, holding it, replenishing the aquifers, and doing that over and over again. Most of those have been drained and filled, and often built on top of. There's also very little green space that remains. And this hardscape landscape means that it's very difficult to replenish groundwater. The other challenge that happens is if you look at that brick underground channel, subgrade channel, these are not mapped. And so there's very little understanding of where they are, and there is no protection at all of them. And so I have heard stories in Kathmandu of people, there's a lot of informal development and illegal, unfettered development as well, of, well, I was digging my foundation for my little building, and I came across this brick channel, and it had water in it. It was the oddest thing. So it's okay, we dug up the bricks, we diverted the water, we put some drainage in, and here's my home. And what that means is 100 meters away, a Hiti runs dry. So there's lack of protection, and then there's a lot less opportunity to actually replenish very necessary groundwater. So we created a project, and this project was largely funded by the State Department, since I know this evening is also partly funded by them, of inventory and mapping to understand where the Hitis were, gather all the literature, do a desk review, and then actually hit the ground and see what's out there, what we can find, where they are they flowing, are they providing water, and then of course talk to community members. How do you use this? In your memory, when did this one run dry? Oh, we used to use this just even 5 years ago, and then suddenly it ran dry. And we compiled all this, creating this inventory, and then from that chose 3 of these systems that we felt we could rehabilitate and use as model projects to show this is how this can be done. And along the way, developing guidelines, manuals that can be used, and of course working always with the water authorities, trying to get them to buy into this. And we're still laying the groundwork to try to change policy and get protective policy put in place, that these systems are recognized and protected not only as heritage, which they very much are, but as part of the water infrastructure that needs to be managed, maintained, and protected. And this is the first Hiti that we completed. It's actually the oldest that we found in our inventory. It dates back to at least the 7th century, so the very early part of this history. And until, about a decade ago, it was a key part of the community in terms of its water provision. This was a place where people went to get their water. And then it stopped providing flow. On top of it, as you can see, the complex, these are normally beautifully built complexes that have wonderful decorative features. Often the outspouts are intricately carved stone. And they are also community centers because people come and get their water and they spend time there. And there are often shrines, so there are religious components. These are cultural and social spaces. But as you can see, this one also, the drainage was not working. So it flooded, you have all this kind of muck here, and it was just an inhospitable place that stopped being used. But everybody said this needed to come back. So we chose this as our first project. So what do we do? Well, we had to figure out where this channel ran. Again, they're not mapped. So we took out the good old GPR and figured out where was this going? Where was it connecting to an aquifer? Okay, it kind of goes under, around this building. Can we follow it? And we found how it worked and began to understand where the breakage was. And of course, had to take it apart, dismantle, excavate, put it back together, and then do all of that for the whole Hiti complex to fix the drainage therein. Just a few images, as I said, these are places that are very important to the community. They have social, cultural, and religious value. And so the community members insisted, before we do anything, we have a puja, a religious ceremony to kind of bless the starting of this and make sure that this went well. I will admit, a rather messy work site underneath, but you can see the work underway and getting to that infrastructure underground so that we can figure out what to do and how to do it. And then this image, that's normally a video, this is the first moment that water flows again. We bring the water back after reconnecting and rehabilitating this infrastructure. And I had some other images that I just received that show the completed HET system with water flowing, and it's now providing between 4,000 and 5,000 liters per day of water on average. So this is something that, again, has become a key part of this neighborhood and of this community. So to end, I want to take us to our last project in India. And this is a bit more of a sweeping project because we've really been looking across much of the country at the water infrastructure. But before I get there, some of the stats. India is yet another country that suffers from very high water stress. Over half of it at high or extremely high, which means there is not enough water. As an example, Bangalore is using 150% of its groundwater recharge. That's not sustainable. And this is a story you hear city after city, community after community across many parts of India. So there's a great need. And yet, India is one of those cultural landscapes that is absolutely littered with water infrastructure. Again, sometimes quite ancient, but through every decade, every period, there is incredible infrastructure, sometimes still used, other times abandoned. And so the first thing we did was this inventory, what exists, and begin to classify from the literature, what types of infrastructure do we have traditionally in India? And you can see the categories: storage and access, irrigation networks, distribution networks, interface structures, etc. And then we began to choose projects where we felt we could make a difference. And we could use as model projects of how do you rehabilitate these types of places. And I should say we are very lucky to have here a partner in Tata Consultancy Services that is funding almost all of our water projects across India. And right now we have 17 active projects, mostly step wells, but we also have some reservoirs, and also at least one ghat, so an interface basically between the water of the river and the bank of the river that has great cultural, social, and often religious value and significance. Just some examples. I'll talk a bit more about the one in the upper left in a moment, but down below, a kind of iconic-looking stepwell in the state of Gujarat in western India. I love this image because it shows what these wells are. They are not just places to gather water, but they are places of social gathering and communing and recreation as well. This is a Bauli in Jodhpur in the state of Rajasthan. And so you can see how they are used and are very much part of the community. Just a drawing to describe the typical step well, and they come in all forms and shapes, but this is basically how they work. Not unlike Western wells, at least that I'm familiar with, obviously provides direct access to groundwater. But unlike the wells that I have seen mostly in the West, it has this incredible access, full body access for many people at one time, to sit, to relax, to take respite from the heat in many parts of India where it is very hot almost year-round, and of course to gather water. Some of them even have separate areas for livestock that can come, drink, bathe, and that water is kept separate and does not mix in with the other water. So they're quite incredible in terms of their engineering specificity and functionality, but also very important socially. So the first Bauli that we have completed is in the center of Delhi. It actually sits in an archaeological park, Mehrauli Park. Many of you may have visited. It's where Qutub Minar is. And this Bauli, known as Rajon Ki Bauli, is a 4-story well, and you can see the structure, the built fabric that is part of this infrastructure. And the challenge we had there, actually when we found it, when we arrived, the water filled all 4 stories and was fetid and nasty. And that was in part because there were drainage issues, it wasn't connecting properly to the groundwater, it was overfilled, and on top of it, always the problem, illegal effluent coming from nearby buildings that had not been connected properly to sanitation lines. So we first had to work with the local authorities to get that dealt with, because that we couldn't do anything about until that was managed. And then we had to drain the water and obviously do any sort of structural stabilization that was needed, and basic restoration, both needed in terms of structure and other, but also aesthetic, repointing and whatnot of bricks and stone masonry. And then once we got all of that structure fixed, and of course all the water connections resolved and working, we were then able to fill back the valley, bring the water back, let the groundwater come back in, and then think about maintenance and water quality. Now, as I said, this isn't an archaeological park. This is a ticketed place. One gets tickets to enter, and there are park grounds and all these various wonderful ruins throughout the park. So this is not a place that's going to be used by community in terms of fetching water or even swimming. But the water is used for irrigation of the surrounding green space. And so we could be creative. And I love this solution, or this strategy, of putting in 4 species of fish. 3 of them eat algae and other biological growth to keep that water clean. 1 of them eats mosquito larvae, because of course we didn't want a mosquito vector issue from this body of water. We also introduced an aerator, of course, to provide enough oxygen for the fish and prevent stagnation, and then a system of regular maintenance. And so there's daily skimming of the surface that's done by the site managers, and periodic treatment with alum that basically combines with biological material and falls to the bottom, and then can be dredged out at various moments. So this is how we found the Baoli in 2022. As I said, the 4 stories were basically filled. It's never the way it should be, except in an extreme monsoon season. And the water was pretty nasty. And this is the way we left it earlier this year, with all of the built fabric around it and in it restored and stabilized where it needed that, and then of course the water system working. And as I said, that water is now used for irrigation of much of the green space in the park. But this provides a really interesting model for how one can rehabilitate, reuse, and bring back to life many of these structures and this type of infrastructure that is sitting there and sometimes just left with no management and thought, well, it's full of fetid water, so nothing that we can do. And that's not the case. So I will end there by saying that if we intend to really thrive and be able to adapt in the face of our current and upcoming water challenges, we need to use all of the tools in our arsenal. And I strongly believe that heritage, water heritage, historic infrastructure, and even traditional knowledge need to be part of those tools. And that's how, together, we're all going to build a better and brighter water future. Thank you very much. Thank you, thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bell. If anyone has any questions, there are some microphones, and ask away.
I hope I have answers.
Hi, that was,
Sure, okay, yeah. Laura Davis from Limassol Design, now in Rhode Island. Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's really enthralling as ever, and I think so incredibly vital for the context of this conference. I wanted to ask if you could speak a little bit to the challenges of intangible heritage in terms of rituals of maintenance and coming to mind, for example, 3rd century BC Chola dynasty water infrastructure that had deep annual and sort of regular heritage maintenance rituals and collective maintenance, and the loss of all of that, and then possibly also what that might mean for preservation and conservation in a state like Rhode Island that has more than 800 dammed waterways as a function of the history of industry in the state.
Yeah, thank you, Laura, for that. So the intangible piece is a very important one, and I didn't spend too much time on it. The Rajon Kibali example is a bit unique because it is within this archaeological park, and so of course there are site managers who are really involved here. But at our other sites that are within living communities, one of the things that we're really working on is engaging that community, basically having community custodians who take care of this, because as Laura said, that's exactly how these things were managed in the past. And so we've been able to get various community organizations, CBOs, and smaller entities together to take on, first of all, learn and relearn what they may have forgotten or perhaps they themselves never knew, and then take on some of that responsibility. Now, of course, that's an ongoing responsibility that one has to really stay on top of. We'll have to see how that pans out over time. The other piece in terms of ceremony that you were touching on that at least went off in my mind is often in Hindu ceremony, for various festivals and whatnot, you make, traditionally, there would be images of deities made of clay, made of natural, typically organic colorants and paints, and then always at the end of the festival, the idea is that the deities go back, and they always go back through water. And so traditionally, these would then be dissolved, immersed, and eventually dissolved in waterways, but also in bauli and reservoirs. Of course, in recent times, these things are made with latex paints, not always clay, and things that are not going to dissolve and that you see floating down the river days later. And that's also a kind of behavior challenge that we need to manage, that India as a country, but definitely localities need to manage. And we've had lots of conversations about that, but hard for us to police that and integrate that change. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Hi. Okay, it's working. Hi, I'm Erin Fisher, and I'm going to ask you engineering, because I'm an engineer. So Kathmandu, all I could think of while you were talking about this was the earthquake in Kathmandu, and wondering how much of the infrastructure was affected by the earthquake and how much of that was like thought of. And then if I could throw in a second engineering question, it has to do with the LA. The other thing I was thinking about was how in the US, the Army Corps of Engineers is heavily involved, but also that interstate play of who gets to use the water when the water source is in a different state, and how that affects things like the Snake River and like the Upper West and things like that. So I'm just curious if you have a pulse on how much collaboration there is there. So sorry to throw you two questions.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So first of all, you say engineering questions. I am not an engineer. I have to say that in this room. But for Kathmandu, yes, and of course it is a very seismically active place. And indeed, I did not mention that, but in recent earthquakes, we know that a number of HETI systems were actually damaged in those earthquakes. And of course, there's also all the built superstructure that we know has been damaged. So that has been a factor and something to consider. I don't know that we've built in the necessary resilience against earthquakes, to be quite honest. LA is very complex. So again, back to Chinatown, that's the deal that's brokered to get the Owens Valley water. And basically, it's insane, really, because there are communities within LA County, small communities, 200, 300, 400 people, and they have a sheet of paper from 1882 that says whatever water falls off this particular rock shed belongs to them. And that is their legal claim to that water. So that's part of the landscape. It's very challenging. That said, there's a lot of collaboration between the various entities. And of course, water comes from the Colorado River, and so there are cross-state collaboration. There's a lot of energy that comes in from Nevada. So there are a lot of collaboration across about these sorts of resources. It's not perfect, but people realize that they have to do it. And I think it's getting better as people are articulating shared visions and spelling out specific targets that they want to meet together. Yeah.
Hi, Lonnie Hovey, Heritage Architect. My question is related to the rehabilitation of these baulis. Are they using a traditional mortar to that region that can survive underwater, like Pozzolan mortar that you would find in Italy? Or is it a mortar that needs to be continually refreshed as well?
Good question, and I don't know that I know the answer to that, but I am going to say, I know that they're using lime. I don't know if it's a pozzolanic lime or not, but the idea was that this would not need to be redone in at least 30, 40 years, let's put it that way. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Shania Peterson, and just wanted to thank you for your wonderful conversation. I am born and raised in Norfolk, Virginia, which is one of the poster childs in the country for sea level rise, and I just finished my master's in Charleston, South Carolina, which is also facing imminent sea level rise. And one of the texts that we read in my master's program related to the city's inaction surrounding racial issues and the refusal to segregate, and how that is now playing out in terms of water management strategy. And I am just wondering, and perhaps this is a question that I'll pose for the room at large, but how do we enact change in a area or within a culture that is resistant to change, or that is refusing to bend or make alterations to the culture or to the built environment because of aesthetics or because of heritage? You say we should look to heritage, and I completely agree, but when that is used as a justification for inaction, where do we go from there? Thank you.
I don't think there's an easy answer to that, but I will show my colors as an urban planner, at least by training, and say it's all about bringing the stakeholders together. It's participatory planning, and it takes a lot of patience and a lot of education. I think that's the key thing, and I know everyone here in this room does that all the time, but it's an essential part of our role as preservationists is to educate people about the needs, but also the opportunities and the possibilities. But that takes perseverance and patience, I'll be very honest. I don't know, and by the way, just in terms of the kind of social challenges and socioeconomic challenges around sea level rise, there's a wonderful book I'd really encourage you to read. It's called something like Seawalls by Summer Gray. So look that up, it's really good, and it talks about not only what seawalls do in 2 or 3 case studies, but that real socioeconomic aspect of them. And often they're put in places with communities that don't have a lot of money, and so they kind of live the brunt of that. So anyway, a reference for you.
Janet Null, architect. Jonathan, you'll be happy to know that you taught me something very important tonight. My family moved to Los Angeles in 1955. I never knew the LA River as anything but a concrete ditch, usually filled with garbage. I did not know how much water came down from the mountains through that river. I did not know why they channelized it. And LA was always dry. We never felt we had enough wet water. And we thought it all came from the Colorado River. We had a brown landscape, we had fires and mudslides and things to deal with. And in fact, the place I grew up burned down this year. Yeah. So we always thought about that environment as dry, waterless, taking the water from out of state and bringing it there. Not any understanding of the LA River and its role. And so the lesson that you taught me is that we all need to understand the water of our place and the water system, where it comes from, what it does, how it relates to the heritage and stuff, and I bet most of us don't know that at all. And Kyle, you probably know, also being in California, we lived in drought practically all the time. So I think that's a key lesson here, is I'm going to go back and try to understand more about where I live and how that water system is related to the culture, to the geography, et cetera, because I don't think we generally think about that.
It's very true, and thank you for that, Janet. And if I could add one thing about the LA River, you know, I often talk about traditional ecosystem knowledge or environmental knowledge, and one of the key stories of the early settlers, the early Europeans coming in to the LA landscape, is the LA River was a meandering river that changed course and flooded seasonally. That's the way it worked. And the indigenous people, the Tongva people, lived quite far from the river and also had movable houses. And when the Spaniards came in, they were like, why are they so far from the river? They got to walk over there, get water. You know, this is crazy. And that's part of the knowledge that we often miss in the landscape that's tied up in people who know the landscape well. They didn't live near the river because it flooded all the time. And they also knew sometimes it was so bad they had to move even further away. So they had movable structures. So that's something that I hope we can all pay attention to a bit more because, again, those lessons are in the landscape if we know how to see them.
Any more questions?
Okay. I think that's it.
Can we have a round of applause for this excellent?
Thank you.